So we are going to go through the book of Genesis. And so we talked and we, for the most part, picked the book of Genesis because that's something that a lot of us have at least some knowledge of. And so I wanted to give you guys an opportunity, if you know something or if you have a question or things like that, to kind of hop back and forth and we'll answer things as we go. But I want to do this by reading through the chapter. And I've given my own notes, things that I think are important for you to note and think about. And we'll go from there. Genesis chapter 1, we'll start in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So this is the first statement made in the Bible. It's a wonderful statement, and there are a bunch of things to note. One, it doesn't beg the question, it just assumes God. It doesn't ask you to believe in God to start with, it just says, hey, in the beginning, God did this. And so that's important to note. The Bible is not trying to give a defense of God or anything like that as it starts. It's just saying, hey, God did this. He is the answer, and this is what's going on. Now, this is also one of the most highly contended statements about the Bible. If you talk to most people, they will generally attack the idea of God being the creator, which isn't a bad, how do I say that? It's a wise place to start if you were trying to attack something, because it comes up throughout the scripture. That's why God is looked at as worthy of worship. That's why the angels and many other people worship God through the Bible. It's because he's the creator. He's the one who is our maker, and he can tell us what is right and what to do. So in our schools today, kids are often taught that this on its face is untrue. And what do they try to posit instead? Generally, it would be evolution, or the Big Bang Theory leading to evolution.
I don't see how somebody can believe that.
Yeah.
Big Bang Theory and not believe there's a creator. I don't get it.
You're an unbeliever, aren't you?
I'm a believer.
She's a denier.
Yeah. So do you guys know what the Big Bang Theory, can someone define that for us?
Stupidity.
It was just a big
explosion
and
everything.
Okay. So just a big explosion and everything happened. Yeah, I could definitely see why that sounds like stupidity. Yeah.
In World War II.
Yeah, but that
Yes, ma'am.
destroyed, that didn't create.
All of our 18 exchange students
It does create.
believe in evolution from all over the world
Yeah.
and just could not conceive that we believed in creation. When they found out we did, it was just like mind-blowing to them because we could walk and talk. And
You mean you weren't invalids by believing in creation? Okay.
yeah, they were just blown away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because a lot of people assume if you believe in creationism, you just must be dense. And that's not the truth of the matter. That's not the truth of the matter. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of science that goes and talks about why we can believe the earth was created. And not as long ago as they like to make you think. So, but here's a question. If they're going to cast doubt on the very opening of the Bible, if they can make you doubt the beginning, why trust anything else? If they can make you doubt, did God really create? Well, if you're going to come to that point and say, no, God didn't really create it. It was a big bang with, evolution, which eventually, had to start with spontaneous generation. Then you get evolution, and we're all just, protoplasm and fish and, mud goop with fizzing brains.
Boy, what an imagination you have, Alex. I love it.
It's just an interesting way that they look at the world.
The
I told you I've been listening to Pastor Bevan in Chillicothe, and he spent like almost 2 sermons on just the first 4 words.
Yeah.
In the beginning, God. If you don't believe that, then you're not gonna believe any other part of it. You shouldn't, I guess, if you don't believe in God. He was the one that was an eyewitness to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So if you don't believe those first 4 words,
And I'll tag on to that, the first 4 words, because in the beginning is Alpha, because God was eternal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and for people to really be able to wrap their brains around God being eternal, and yet there was a creation. The beginning is actually the Alpha.
You know, it's interesting. It's not that people have a problem with something being eternal. They just have a problem with it being God. Because even when you look at what Einstein said, Einstein just thought the earth was eternally there. And as we've looked through history, through things like the Hubble telescope, we realize that that's obviously not the case. The universe is expanding. It's obvious that there were times when things were closer together. There would have eventually been a time when things were all there, and then boom. The Big Bang is what they will call it. But I remember in 9th grade, my teacher said something along the lines of, you know, if someone could figure out the Big Bang, they'd get a Nobel Peace Prize, or a Nobel Prize. And I'm like, great, God did it. Where's my prize? And needless to say, they didn't give me a prize. But now some people will come at this in a really interesting way. Some people will say, oh, well, it's not that the Bible was being literal here, that this is Hebrew poetry. 1, no. 2, if that were the case, then the rest of the people in the Bible would understand that, right? They wouldn't refer to it as truth. They wouldn't look at it and they wouldn't say, okay, well, God obviously did this in 6 days. No, they without a doubt believed that. And even when you look in Exodus 20:11, when God is giving the 10 Commandments to Moses, this is what is said. It says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it." So he says, God made everything in 7 days. In Psalm 33, here's what it says. It says, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. He gathered the waters of the sea together as an heap, and layeth up the depth in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast." And so God didn't need to, over time, let things naturally progress from this to that to this. It's not like, I mean, think about, especially for the theistic evolutionist, you have to think that God existed in the beginning to make everything, but you don't believe he could make it in a finished form. Why? I don't get it.
But why couldn't he have taken 100 billion years to do it versus 6 days? What difference would it make? He still did it.
It makes a difference because the Bible makes sure to point out that he did it this way. That's the only reason it makes a difference. If, God didn't ever make a claim about how he did it and just said, hey, I created the heavens and the earth, and there was nothing specifically that said how he did it, and say he wanted to slowly build things up. Now, there is one problem with evolution that I don't think you can get around. Namely, evolution has death before sin. And so things would have had to have lived and died and mutated and lived and died and mutated, and that totally reduces the Genesis 2 and 3 account to nothing, because then you have no reason for original sin. You have no reason to think sin actually causes death. But, if God had just, wanted to slowly let a tree grow for 1,000 years, if he hadn't chose to do it another way, there's nothing wrong with him having done it that way. Does that make sense? Anyway.
Yes.
All right,
But
so
he didn't have to do it in 6 days.
he didn't.
He could have just poof it all at one time.
That's right.
So
And-
he's showing us our week.
He was setting apart the week, and that's actually what you get in Exodus 20:11. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. And that's actually the reason that we celebrate the Sabbath, as a reminder of God's work in creation. Now, note that God speaking was the method for the creation story. As we heard in Psalm 33, God spake and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. It is also important to note that time, space, and matter have to come into existence at the same point. Time, space, and matter come into existence at the same point. They are called a continuum. So you see this in Genesis 1:31. In the beginning, that's time. God created the heaven, that's space, and the earth, that's matter. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. People who believe, there is a theory out there that, God did use billions of years, and it's hidden between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. That's called the gap theory. It's just an unnecessary theory. First off, because technically he doesn't talk about day 1 starting until verse 3. But technically, there's no need for that. There's no need to assume billions of years, especially when God says, hey, I did it in 6 days, and it doesn't help anything. Even the idea of light across the universe doesn't make sense on the current time scale that they've given the universe to have existed. The universe is far too vast for us to have the light that we have. It wouldn't be here. We could not have... They think the universe would then have to be too young for how old the universe would have to be if it is done the way that they said it was. Which is still pretty silly. All right, so we'll keep going. I think the gap theory, at the very least, is meaningless, and at most, it creates unnecessary doubts in the truth of God's word. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, is verse 2. So God initially created the earth in an incomplete way, as somebody noted. It was not actually all done right when he created it. He used 6 days to make things the way that he wanted them before he is finished with them, before he rested on day 7. All right, so let's get to the days. Day 1. This is when the first day technically is noted to have started. I think you can find in Psalm 33:6 an argument that all the way from verse 1 that still was a part of the first day, but anyway. It says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So I have questions for you guys. What was this light that God had made?
That's very thought-provoking, and I thought about it a lot, but I'm thinking it was the presence of the Lord. I mean, that's the only only conclusion I could draw was that because there was no sun or moon or stars at that time.
Right.
But there was obviously light.
Right.
Maybe truth?
Okay. So I like exactly where you went. My general stance is it's God's glory being expounded upon. It's being shown. I think when God created light, the Bible talks about God being like wrapped in light. The Bible talks about God being in an unapproachable light. I think that's God's expression of his glory to the universe. And for some way, how he did this is he would have had to have lighted the world at some point and then turned it back off at some point so that it would have that light and dark be the first day. So that's kind of interesting.
He doesn't say the darkness was good.
He doesn't say the darkness was good. He doesn't necessarily say anything he created wasn't good.
But he said the light was good.
Yeah. And God called the light. God saw that it was good. God divided the light from the darkness.
It is noted in Revelation when he recreates everything
That there's no
he
night.
himself is the light.
Yeah.
So,
And there's no night.
yeah.
So this is essentially the point marked from when you can begin to tell time. All of our time measurements have to do with light, except technically the week, which has to do with creation. Yes.
I have one question just to ask people, because I experience it all the time. When you're stressed and worried about something, does it not seem so much worse at night and in the morning when you wake up? It seems just better.
See, that's true.
I've definitely heard that. I don't know what.
I've experienced it, I just wondered how many people do.
Yeah.
I have.
You have less distraction. The light distraction. There's so much more to see.
You're just left alone with your thoughts.
Distractions are wrong.
No, it's more than that.
I didn't say it was the answer.
Oh man. But anyway, all of our time is from light. We keep track of time from light. Anyhow, whether that be the sun, the moon, whatever, we keep track of our time from light. So we'll move on to day 2. At this rate, we might finish, day 4 by the time we leave today. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." What? Who wants to say what that means?
Water canopy.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Water canopy. Theory.
Water canopy theory.
But, yeah.
So there is a theory that when God created originally, there was a canopy of water surrounding the earth. This would have created somewhat of a hyperbolic chamber of sorts. This is sometimes used to explain how mankind would have lived longer in those time frames, how mankind would have had less to deal with the sun killing him and maybe having a more pure atmosphere. And so those are things that come up often. It is a theory that is given between this verse and to answer some of the other questions that people often ask about Genesis.
It's also how it could rain for 40 days and 40 nights.
There you go. Yeah, and we'll definitely be coming to that at Genesis 6 through 9. And God made the firmament, and it says he divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so, and God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. All right, so if the firmament is heaven, how could the waters be both above and below? Kind of just talked about that, I think, but yeah.
Where does rain come from?
There you go.
Snow that we got yesterday.
Yeah,
They
whoever
come from above.
decided that. It's also important to note that there are 3 talked about heavens. There's the atmosphere, the day sky, what you see. There's space, the night sky, what you see. And then there's heaven where God is. And so when it says God separated the waters under the heaven from the waters above the heaven, it could mean any of those. So, well, not the third one, but other than that.
Again, Alex,
Say what again?
name them
3
again,
heavens.
please.
The 3 heavens?
Yes.
There is heaven 1 is the atmosphere. It's the day sky, what you see outside, where the birds fly. Then there is heaven as in space, what you see at nighttime. You get a glimpse out to the vastness of God's creation. And then there is the heaven where God is.
Don't you, he always says in the evening and morning
Mm-hmm.
or day. We always go morning and evening, to us morning comes first.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, that's why I'm asking.
Does anyone have the answer to that? Why would he say evening and morning?
Is it Jewish, like, because their Sabbath started at Sunday?
Yeah, so here's the way to understand it. Their days did not go from midnight to midnight. They went from 6 to 6.
Okay.
So the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning were the second day. And that's kind of how that would go.
Makes sense.
All right. So we are up to day 3. Somebody want to read verses 9 and 10?
And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so at this point, God moved the waters off the earth to cause the earth to appear. God sets limits to where the water could go, and this is the reason that the world is not constantly inundated with water. God had planned how far the water should go and says, no more. This is talked about in a couple different passages. If somebody doesn't mind to read Job 38, 8 through 11.
For who shut up the sea with doors, when it brake forth as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy pride waves be stayed.
Yeah. Proverbs 8:29. Whoever tried to read that at the same time.
When he gave to the sea his decree that the waters should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth.
So God had picked how far the water should get to go, and he keeps them back. And the way he does that, we may not always know, but we know scientifically now, and this wouldn't even be possible yet because it doesn't exist yet, but God uses things like the moon to help control our tides and things like that. But right now he's doing that without any of that existing. So that's pretty cool. Verse 11, we are still on day 3. Somebody read 11, somebody else read 12, and someone else 13.
And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day.
Thank you. So it should be noted, this is the beginning of the kind speech. He says the trees, the grasses, the fruits, they started producing after their own kind. In the Bible, it makes a big deal about things not leaving their own kind. So there wasn't a mango tree that magically morphed into an apple tree. There wasn't a banana tree that randomly decided it wanted to grow peanuts one day. God has kept things with a specific sequence in them to make only that thing. And that's why evolution has such a problem, is because you don't actually have anything that bridges that between the kinds. There were experiments that were done to try to bridge the kinds in different things. The best you get to, I think, I think they tried with like a horse and a donkey, and you get one generation of animal that can't procreate. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, they may have even tried with a horse and a zebra, sure. I may hold off on that comment before I'll check and see if it's right.
But they're all the same scientific category. They've never been able to reproduce anything that crosses lines between the scientific categories.
Right.
They can't cross it, they've tried.
Right. And that's the point, is God made us to be after our own kind.
You can graft wood together, but you have to do it. It don't change by itself.
Yeah.
For a tree, graft apples on the apples or something like that.
You mean I can staple the fruit on it, but it doesn't make it an apple tree?
The base is still base.
Ah,
You can graft that branch in and it'll grow, but it don't do it by itself.
yeah. It's a good answer. All right, so this also gives the definition of fruit here. It specifies that a fruit is something that has seeds within itself. So I think that's pretty nifty. So we're up to day 4. I wasn't sure we were going to make it here. Does anyone have any questions or other comments they want to make at this point? We're just finishing day 3. Thoughts? Mike, is your hand up? Okay. All right, well, let's keep going then. Let's move down the line. I've been doing a lot of reading, so I'm going to pass some of that off. Haha. We'll start right here. Will you read 14, and then we'll just one verse apiece coming around?
Ready?
Yep.
And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years.
And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so.
And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also.
God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light on the earth.
And to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good.
And the evening and the morning were the 4th day.
All right. So even though God made light on day 1, he had not yet created the stars, the sun, the moon, which you guys already knew. You're smart like that. But God truly hung the earth on nothing. Think about it. Right now, the earth is kept in place by gravitational pull. It's kept in place by the pull of the sun and the other planets and the moon. And that's how we stay where we are in our solar system. But God literally would have had to have hung the earth in space with nothing else to keep it where it was.
Well, what's to say it would hold in place with anything besides God holding it? Because we can't do it with a rocket ship, man, and all his great knowledge.
Sure.
And the sun has sat there and burned for how many years, according to the evolutionists? Without using energy.
Well, I guess I'm not understanding your point.
Well, there is no human explanation to how the Earth stays where the Earth is in the orbit it's in. We cannot duplicate it. If it's something that could be duplicated, the evolutionists would have a point that they can't duplicate it with anything.
See, but I don't even know if they would have a point even if they could duplicate it. And I think, I guess it is theoretical, gravity in general, but it's practical too. So the idea that we are kept in place where we are in our solar system by gravity, I think, although it is in theory, I think it... Huh?
It doesn't hold any grounds at all. It's God's will that it stays where it is.
Sure. But I think God has also used things to keep things in balance. So that makes sense. Yes, sir.
I just might add that we don't understand way too much other stuff. I
Amen.
agree with you, but we don't, that's only to what our knowledge is available at the time. We're learning more and more. It still won't negate God, because if he goes away, it all goes away.
Right.
But we need to learn more about the universe, about the earth, to even understand how it stays together. None of it stays together without him.
Right. He is ultimately the
We don't know how any
sustainer.
of it stays together, and
We're not gonna
evolutionists can't prove anything. They can just make suppositions.
move the earth closer to the sun in the winter time.
Yeah. All right. So let's go on from there. God noted also in this portion that this is how we would keep track of time. All the way back in Genesis chapter 1, God says you're going to use the stars and the sun and the moon for times and seasons and things like that. He notes that these are what we're going to use for signs, seasons, for days and years.
You know, I was gonna say in the first part about the light that when God moved upon the earth,
Mm-hmm.
that, to me, that was him supporting everything, because he had no need for light. Light was something he invented anyway. He was light. So, without him, we didn't need light until like the third day, fourth day, and that's where we get our seasons and our time. But he would have no need for it, none.
Right. He could have worked just as well in the dark. Yeah, and I think some of that has to do with the idea of light being how we measure time. God then measured the days from that point on and said, hey, the evening and the morning were the first day, and then the second day.
I think it ties in with what Chuck was saying. It's his essence.
Sure.
That moved upon everything.
I agree with that 100%.
And that's true, because in Revelation, we know it's all undone. You know, when
Yeah.
melts.
Quits.
With
Yeah.
fervent heat.
Changes
God
his,
withdraws,
changes his plan,
it's-
and
it's a
he doesn't
done
change his
deal.
plan, but changes the way it works, yeah.
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 Yep. All right, so day 5. Who's reading next? Where are we?
Over there, that.
Tyler, go for it.
And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven.
Next.
And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth.
Somebody read 21, please.
And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good.
All right, and 23, because we read 22 already.
And God blessed.
That's all right. So, God is now bringing forth living creatures in day 5, specifically fowls and water creatures. The term great whales seems to indicate not necessarily whales, but the word would then be akin to something kind of like dinosaurs. This may be where God started creating some of the dinosaurs. Is an interesting word. God's command for the animals was the same that he gives to us, be fruitful and multiply. And the speech of kind continues. God made the animals only to be able to go after their own kind. So it's not like it was just the fruits and the trees and things like that that could only go after their own kind, but also the animals, as we well know. All right, day 6, somebody read, starting at 24.
And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so.
And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good.
Yep. I drove him out, guys. I'm sorry.
Say, you got something.
I know.
Evolution.
I don't know. All right, now God now makes all the land animals, including whatever walks on dry ground, like beasts, not beats, cattle, and bugs. Yet God had in his heart to then make a special creation. From here, God opens with a very familiar verse. It says, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Amen. There's a lot there. So here we see that God made man to be an authority figure over the earth, to have power to choose what to do with it over the animals and the rest of creation. I would argue that this is a part of the image of God that God put upon man. The image is continued by man being a moral being. Man can do things that are right and things that are wrong. We do not go after an animal if it cheats on its spouse. We do not blame an animal and convict him for murder if it kills something else. Now, we may put it down, but we don't blame it for murder. We recognize that they are not moral beings. We also are self-conscious and volitional. We have a will. We make choices. The image is continued by man being creative. God, who created everything, created man and told man to subdue it and to have dominion over it and to use it for his own purpose in that sense. We were made in the image of God mentally, morally, and socially. Another thing about this, man's image is tripartite. He has a body, soul, and spirit in fashion after God. Now, God doesn't have a body, a soul, and spirit, but he's tripartite. He's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. We haven't hit this yet, but notice that God uses plural pronouns to talk about himself. He says, and God said, let us make man in our image.
Trinity.
The Trinity. You have that first view in of the Trinity. It should also be mentioned that this image is found both in men and women. That's how he finishes verse 27. He says, male and female created he them, in the image of God created he him. Now, how does that go with 1 Corinthians 11? Are you guys familiar? You will be in a minute. All right, 1 Corinthians 11. We might end the class with this. We'll have to finish this chapter next week. Or maybe I'll give this as homework and have you look up 1 Corinthians 11. Here's what I want you to look up in 1 Corinthians 11 so we can actually finish the chapter. Where is it? Verse... I'd like you to read verse 7 and 8. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 7 and 8. And then tell me what that means, knowing that in Genesis 1, God said he made both man and woman in his image.
God's not physical.
That's true.
We're talking about physical image.
That's true. All right, so we'll keep going from there, but that's something I want you to look at when you have time. The special creation of man is also what gives mankind dignity, unlike other animals. That is why we believe these truths to be self-evident. That's why we know that mankind has an inherent worth that is given by the image of God being on man. Somebody read verse 28.
And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth.
It should be noted that this is the first time God blesses any part of his creation. The command to be fruitful and multiply is there, but also to subdue the earth. God intended for man to choose how he would use things to actively create and bring the world around him under his dominion. Forgive my spelling. Go ahead and read 29 and then 30.
And God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat.
Okay. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth on the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so.
In this section, it should be noted that in the early days of man, meat would not be eaten. He didn't eat animals, and the animals didn't eat animals. Everything ate plants. Now, this, in my opinion, is the only sad part from before creation, because I like meat. That's why they make Impossible Burgers, so I can think it's meat.
The herbs, it's gonna make them like meat.
Well, the word meat there means food.
It does.
It doesn't mean meat.
You're right, but they ate the greens for food, which is sad because I like meat. Tyler doesn't care, but
But it's really exciting for animal lovers because in heaven, you know, after the fall, God says that he will put a fear of the animals of people.
Mhm.
So before that time, they didn't.
right.
No
So
bacon?
there won't be,
Oh, I'm not sure.
there won't be, but there'll be things better than bacon
No.
that aren't bacon. So that's really exciting to me. In heaven, you know, that's why the lion and the lamb can lie together and we can
Yeah.
pet the lions and the.
Kid can stick his hand in a snake's den and
Yeah.
not be bit. It's pretty cool. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Finally, to close out the chapter, God says for the first time that his creation is very good. All right, so that is Genesis chapter 1. We're going to hop in next week with Genesis chapter 2. Once again, I will probably make something kind of like this, and when we get in next week, I'm going to ask you what you learned about 1 Corinthians 11 in Tide with Genesis 1.